Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on February 9th, 2019, and is current through the Star Trek Discovery Season 2 episode, An Obol for Charon, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. As you know, we are in a golden age of Star Trek. There are 4 television shows on the way, rumors of more to come, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is Heather Kirby. Heather, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alex. I'm so glad to be here and to talk some Trek with you this morning.
I am super excited to have you here, Heather. You are the mastermind of the Countdown to 1701 hashtag on Twitter that was lighting up the internet prior to the premiere of Discovery Season 2. So super excited to have you here. Thank you for being with me.
You're very welcome, and I'm always happy to talk about Discovery. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Good. Well, there is plenty of Discovery to talk about this week. So, Heather, as I ask my guests every week, I want to know something that's got you excited about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
Well, this is kind of an off-the-wall, just one specific moment combined with something else that happened this week in the episode. But I'm really excited about their infusion of music and pop culture into Discovery and how that connects with the cast and just connects with the audience. Because that scene in this week's episode where Stamets and Tilly started singing David Bowie together was just... It was wonderful, and it was such a callback to the carpool karaoke episode, which happened on Friday. And not only that, like, it wasn't even the David Bowie reference. Like, right before that, Jet Reno referenced Prince as well. And I think it's just really cool to think about these artists that we find legendary right now, and just to imagine that they will be icons still like 200 years in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Shakespeare was one of the greatest artists of his age, and there are Shakespeare plays still in production today. And so I think it's entirely reasonable that some of the greatest sort of shining lights of the arts from our generation would make their way to the 22nd, 23rd century. And I was listening to Transporter M3, the podcast from Scott Kalura a little while ago, and they had Ken Riley from TrekCore.com on, and he made the fabulous point, which is that earlier iterations of Star Trek didn't have the money to license a lot of these musical numbers. So it's really nice that now they are putting the time into just drawing some more of those connections between the viewers today and the story set in the future.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
That's a fabulous one. Mine actually, because you mentioned carpool karaoke, is a little similar. I watched the Star Trek themed episode of Let's Make a Deal this week, which premiered on Monday, and I thought it was delightful. I've never watched Let's Make a Deal before, and this was the first time I'd been exposed to it. You know, it's just a midday game show that they have on, but it was a Star Trek themed episode, and they really leaned into the concept very well, I thought. It was funny. Wayne Brady looks fabulous in a Starfleet uniform, and it featured a number of friends of and hosts of the Tricorder Transmissions, including our good friend Trek Profiles host John Krikorian, who, I'm sorry to say, did not take anything home from his experience, but it was still super fun to watch that. And I just thought the whole thing was very sweet, and it was nice to see CBS do some tie-in marketing with Let's Make a Deal in exactly the same way that they did with the carpool karaoke episode, which came out last week as well.
Oh, definitely. I watched it on Monday as well, and it was a lot of fun. It looked like everyone was having fun, even the guys who weren't actually contestants, just the people in the audience, because I noticed another of the Tricorder Transmissions hosts in the audience just having a wonderful time, Mr. Jim Morehouse, right front and center. So it was definitely looked like it was an amazing time, and it was fun to watch.
Yes, Mr. Morehouse, who spent, it felt like a good portion of the episode on his communicator.
Yeah.
And I will say there were a couple of times where there were Star Trek themed prizes that were like the Star Trek cruise, which was, there were two prizes, the cruise and Honda Fit. And
Yeah.
I mean, if it were me, I absolutely would have chosen the cruise rather than the car.
Oh, yes. Me too. Me too.
All right, that's awesome. So let's turn to this week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
So our first story this week is in regards to the Section 31 show. We talked a bit in the last couple of weeks about the TCAs, which is the sort of Television Critics Association, brings together a bunch of different networks and shows, and they will trot out their latest content to write about. And Alex Kurtzman appeared, it was either last week or the week before, but some of the interviews that were done around that have started trickling out. And we have a story this week about how writing has started on the Section 31 show. So reported by IndieWire, executive producer Alex Kurtzman talked about how Section 31 showrunners Bo Young Kim and Erica Lippolt have already started writing a script for presumably the premiere episode, or at the very least a story treatment for the Section 31 show, while they are also continuing to do double duty on the Discovery writing staff, which is very exciting. He also said that the plan was for the Section 31 show to premiere after the third season of Star Trek Discovery. So we don't yet have a formal confirmation about a third season of Discovery, but from everything the executive producers have said over the last few weeks, that seems like it's certainly in their minds. And so hopefully it will not be too long before we get official word on a pickup. But this is very exciting. Heather, are you looking forward to the Section 31 show?
I am looking forward to it. I believe in the wonderful two women who are the showrunners of this yet unnamed Section 31 show, because I think they are fantastic writers. Erica and Boyan really love Trek, and I think these two have a really good sense of what it means to write Star Trek. And so as much as there are so many sort of like 50-50 reactions when it comes to Section 31, I think these two are going to knock it out of the park. And it's going to be really interesting to see. I think it has to be very preliminary, especially if they're not planning on showing the show until after season 3 premieres, because that's at least a year or two down the road. But I'm excited for it already.
Yeah, and great to see that they are kind of moving ahead really quickly. I mean, Kurtzman made this really great point, which is that modern television shows require so long to produce that you kind of have to start now, even if you're going to be premiering, 2 years from now. So super excited to see that the work is already underway. Kind of puts paid to this idea that had been floating around on the internet that, the franchise was in trouble and some of these shows that had been announced were not going to go ahead. And that, seems very clearly not to be the case. And we are excited to learn more about the Section 31 show as it develops and as these scripts get written and they start to move in from the development phase, which they're in right now, into active production. So we will be covering this all the way through the premiere and beyond. So lots more to come on Section 31. But now let's turn to the other, perhaps more imminent Star Trek show, which is the Patrick Stewart Picard series. We talked a little bit last week about some comments that Sir Patrick had made around the Picard show because he's doing press at the moment for a movie that he's in, The Kid Who Would Be King. And there's been more press from that movie this week. And so more comments from Sir Patrick Stewart regarding the Picard show. This week, he was asked by one media outlet a few questions about the Picard show, and he was talking about it. And then they asked him about the prospect for, it's sort of a ridiculous question. They said, would you, once you've done this TV show, would you then consider doing another Picard movie? And Patrick's response was, actually, we can hear Patrick's response.
Oh, Lord. We are set up with possibly 3 years of this show. So if there is a film, it's a long way off.
So as you can see, he says, they're setting it up for potentially 3 seasons worth of content, which I think is super exciting. When the show was first announced, it kind of seemed like this would be more of, this was going to be one and done for Sir Patrick Stewart, that maybe it was going to be more of a miniseries. But sounds like the indications we've heard over the last few months that maybe there were additional legs to the show and that it might go beyond the first season, that's something that Sir Patrick is on board with, which is super exciting. Heather, how are you feeling about potentially getting 3 seasons of Sir Patrick Stewart as returning to the role of Picard?
I am really excited about Picard. I'm not going to lie. Next Gen was the very first Star Trek show I ever watched as a kid, and Picard was my first captain. And they always say you can't beat your first. And I might have another favorite captain besides him, which we'll mention later. But you can't beat your first. And so it's so exciting to see him back on screen again. And I think a lot of the apprehension around it is kind of due to his age and the fact that people thought, oh, well, he's just doing this as lip service to the fans. He's not going to stick around more than 1 season, things like that. But the fact that he's coming out and saying that he's really excited about it. He's really looking forward to going back into Star Trek and being this character again, and that they're planning on it being more than 1 season, up to 3 seasons. It is really exciting. And there's so much to explore with this show, especially since it's the first show that's really advanced the timeline forward in the Star Trek universe. There's so much they can explore and dive into in the show. And I really hope they get a chance to do that.
Well, speaking of things they can dive into and explore, everybody wants to know who else will be appearing alongside Sir Patrick Stewart in the Picard show. And so any opportunity an actor from the next generation, somebody has to ask them, are they going to appear in the show, they take? And the latest this week is Whoopi Goldberg, who played Guinan in Star Trek The Next Generation. She was appearing on David Tennant's new podcast. David Tennant, the Doctor Who actor, just started a podcast called, imaginatively, David Tennant Does a Podcast With. And his second episode is with Whoopi Goldberg. And during the course of the episode, he asks her, would you be interested in appearing in the Picard show? And her answer is yes. And we will hear a clip of that.
Well, you could presumably go back to Star Trek now. Patrick Stewart's back at it.
I know, but, they have not asked me.
Maybe you need to ask them again. They probably would think you're kidding.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I will. I'll put it out there.
Well, this could be it. Let's put it. We're putting it out there.
All right,
now.
we're putting it out there right now.
But obviously, we don't know who is going to be in the Picard show. They haven't said beyond just Patrick Stewart returning to reprise his role. And it seems like many of these other actors also don't yet have a sense of whether they will be asked to return or not. But Heather, would you be interested in seeing Guinan return for the Picard show?
I would absolutely love to see Guinan return. I mean, she's definitely, especially because Kurtzman has mentioned on a couple different instances that the Picard show is going to be more character driven than even Discovery is, and they really want to focus on the character of Picard. And I take that to mean that they don't want to have it be a huge cast like TNG was, but there are still some characters that are really integral to Picard's character, and Guinan is one of them. I mean, you can tell throughout their interactions in The Next Generation that they have such a history together and such a friendship. And I think it would be amazing to bring her back in, especially since she's willing to do it. I actually listened to the podcast. I am a huge fan of Doctor Who as well. So I recommend if anyone out there, even any sort of Star Trek and sci-fi fan, to listen to his interview with Whoopi, because they talk a lot about how she got into Star Trek in the first place, how she got the role, her view on science fiction in general, and it's really wonderful.
Oh, that's great. I have it lined up on, I'm like a month behind on listening to podcasts, so it's in my queue. I've just not quite made it to it yet, so I'm excited to listen to it.
Yeah, definitely good.
Well, turning our attention from Star Trek on the Way to Star Trek in the Now, we have, this week was the 4th episode of Star Trek Discovery Season 2, An Obol for Charon, and it featured the return of a fan favorite character from The Cage, number 1, as played in The Cage by Majel Barrett, now played in Discovery by Rebecca Romaine. And StarTrek.com had a quick interview with Rebecca up on the site prior to the premiere of the episode, in which they were asking Rebecca about her history with Star Trek, and she talked about how she had watched the show with her mother growing up, and her mother had passed away a couple of years ago, and so she was thrilled to be on the show. There was one little tidbit that I pulled out that I thought indicated something that we might see in future episodes. So if you don't want spoilers of any kind, jump ahead 30 seconds. But she did say, when she was asked about what it was like to be on set, she said, "I lost my mum 2 years ago, and so being on the set, specifically the set I was on, which I'm not allowed to talk about, made me cry." So there's been this question of, are we going to see more of the interior of the Enterprise beyond just the Spock's quarters, which we saw in the premiere, brother? And I think, if I were a betting man, I would say that the set that she's referring to is the bridge of the Enterprise, because it's something that has emotional resonance from having watched the original series. But this is a fun little interview, and I thought that Rebecca's appearance on the show was amazing. But Heather, what did you think? Number one, back in Star Trek. Did you like the portrayal by Rebecca Romaine? Are you looking forward to more appearances by the character?
I'm definitely looking forward to more appearances. I think they teased her so much that she was going to be a part of this episode, and then it was only one scene at the very beginning, and everyone's like, no, we want more number one. But yeah, I thought she was fantastic. I think they did a really good job of really having her emanate Majel. So she really comes across as that same character, and for me it was really awesome to see. I'm looking forward to seeing more of her. I will absolutely take that bet, Alex, because that's exactly where my head went when she mentioned that in the interview as well. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more of number one.
My kind of vision of it is that that one of the last shots of the season as a whole will be Pike back on the Enterprise bridge in the captain's chair with his crew around him, including number one in the sort of con seat, and that will be the last time that we see the Enterprise for the season, and it warps away, and then obviously we go on to season 3 with an entirely Discovery-centric story. So I have got my fingers crossed that we will see the interior of the Enterprise. And it does seem like they've been making a really concerted effort this season to draw more of the connections between the Discovery design aesthetic and the original series' design aesthetic. So, and we see a shot of what appears to be the Enterprise captain's chair in the opening credits, and it looks like a really nice mashup between the two. So I'm so excited if they do it, which it sounds like they will, but when they do it, to see what it's going to look like.
Oh, and we definitely, and in that scene with Pike in number one, where he talks about removing all the holographic imaging throughout the entire ship. No, we just want view screens. I mean, that's definitely a connection to what the Enterprise looks like back then.
Yes, and in last week's episode, the Starbase 5 commander says to Pike, "You must be the only person other than my mother in the quadrant who still communicates via view screens."
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all we have for the show news this week, but we do have a decent amount of merchandise news, which we'll run through really quickly. So last week, we talked about how QMX was introducing the Enterprise badges from Star Trek Discovery Season 2. And this week, they've also announced the release of a set of badges for the Mirror Universe from Season 1. Also available in the 3 division colors, Command, Sciences, and Operations. These are the kind of arrowhead, upside down badges with the red globe in the center. Also very cool. Heather, do you think you'll be picking up one of these Mirror Universe Discovery badges?
I honestly think I might. I really love the Terran Empire logo from Season 1. I think it just has a radiance of kick-ass about it. But it just has a radiance of, yeah, this is really cool. So I'm excited that they're making them for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so intricate. I love it's the upside down delta. There's the sort of Mirror Universe knife design is built into it as well. You have the kind of the planet from in the Deep Space Nine episodes, when after the Terran Empire fell, the Terrans wear that big patch that was the Earth globe. So it's super cool and just filled with callbacks to the original Star Trek episodes. And speaking of original Star Trek, or I guess in this case Star Trek 1, the motion picture, Eagle Moss have announced the next special in their line of special starships, which are the larger sized pieces. And they're going with a really obscure one for the next one, which is Vija. And no, it won't be a 9-foot wide cloud of gas. In this case, they're doing the design of Vija, which, while not seen in the theatrical version of the motion picture fully, though I think it did show up on one of the monitor screens in one of the later scenes of the episode, they're doing the model that you saw in the director's edition of the motion picture, which was released on DVD. So this is Vija. It's a really cool model. It looks very intricate and very detailed. And then also Eagle Moss have announced the next in their line of character busts. So they've got 3 released right now, character busts, one of Kirk, one of Spock, and one of Worf. Data has already previously been announced. And this week, they unveiled the 5th bust in the line, which is Captain Janeway, which is fabulous because they're kind of reaching into doing characters who we don't have many other variations of. And especially Janeway, they've got her with her season 6, season 7 hairstyle. And the previously the only kind of bust that you could get was the Star Trek Icons line, which came from the mid-2000s. And that had her with the kind of season 2, season 3 hairstyle. This is very, very impressive. It's actually my favorite, just looking at the pictures of likenesses of the characters that they've done so far. The Kirk and the Spock were okay. The Worf is really good, and the Data is somewhere between okay and good. But I think this one is very, very good. And then lastly, we have an announcement of new supplemental books to the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game, which, if you haven't checked these out, you have to just for the cover art alone. So there's a line of books under the Star Trek Adventures line, which comes from Modiphius Entertainment. They're a British company. They've released, I think, 4 or 5 books so far, including the core game book, Command Division, Operations Division, Beta Quadrant, and then a compilation of suggested missions called These Are the Voyages. They have announced the release of the Science Division book, which rounds out the Division books, the Alpha Quadrant, which will focus on Alpha Quadrant races like the Cardassians, Bajorans, and then a second mission compendium book for those role players who are through the first one. You'll now have a new set of ready-made missions to go on, which I think is super cool. I love the cover art on these books. I am not much of a gamer, though I would love to find a group who I could play with. But Heather, that's a ton of merchandise this week. Does any of this catch your eye? Are you a big merchandise person? What do you think?
I'm not a huge merchandise person, but it's only because I don't have the money to buy most of this stuff. If I had the money, my entire tiny little apartment would be filled to the walls with it. But I think some of these announcements are really cool. I love the Janeway bust. Janeway's my favorite captain, as much as Picard was my first. Janeway's my favorite, and I think they really captured her fantastically in that bust. So if my dad is listening to this, Christmas. But I just watched the motion picture, Star Trek the motion picture, for the first time like a couple months ago. And I really enjoyed the movie. And so I think that's really kind of definitely a very deep cut model that they went with there. But I think that's really cool. And there's so many, especially since Star Trek has been around for so long, there's so many collectors who go for just really off the wall, not something you're going to find everywhere items. And that's something the V'ger model would definitely catch a person like that's eye. And as for the role-playing games, I'm with you. If I had a group of friends that would be willing to do it, I think it would be a lot of fun. I had no idea these even existed. So I want to go out and try to convince people to come do a Star Trek role-playing game with me now.
I had heard that the Trek Geeks, our good friends Bill and Dan over at the Trek Geeks podcast, are about to launch a new show that is a group playing the Star Trek Adventures game. So I'm excited to tune into that and find out what the game is like when it's being played by a group of fans.
Oh, definitely. That sounds like a lot of fun.
I guess the last thing to say on the Eagle Moss line is that there's been a survey going around. If you're one of the subscribers to the Starships collection, the twice monthly Starships, which is now up to issue something like 140 some. The line had been announced as only running through 160 issues, so we are supposedly getting close to the end, but there is a survey circulating for subscribers about an extension beyond 160 issues, gauging the interest of current subscribers in continuing the line beyond 160, though it does talk about potentially having to increase the costs of the models beyond that in order to sustain the line. There was some, and it kind of raised some ideas of ships that they could do beyond 160, like the LaCool from Star Trek Generations, the Husnock ship from Survivors, the Kazon Mothership, which we saw in the early seasons of Voyager, Temerian warship from Darmok, the Vidian warship, which we saw in episodes like Deadlock. So more cool ships on the way. There's a discussion in the Facebook group for the Hero Collector Star Trek Facebook group if you're interested in getting caught up on that. I am a subscriber. I also responded to the survey and said I'd like to see the line continue because I think I would like those ships as well, even though I am absolutely running out of space for those. But that is the news for the week. And now let's turn to the fun part.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
We've talked about the facts, so now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek. Heather, what's a wish, a theory, or a bit of speculation you have about Discovery, Picard, Section 31, Lower Decks? Hit me with something you think or want from Star Trek in the future.
Okay, so my theory, speculation, dream has to do with Anson Mount's Captain Pike.
Okay.
And I believe that we will see Anson's portrayal of Pike in another show.
Okay.
There are a couple different options and a couple different ways they can work him in, but I think just the overwhelming fan response to his portrayal of Pike has been so positive that they would be out of this world to not work him into another show in some sort of way. So as much as like it would be really awesome for him to have his own show and to see the Enterprise and Number One and Spock go about their own adventures, I'm not quite sure if they will end up doing that, but I think they could still work him into some of the shows they have planned, like guest appearances in the Section 31 show, since he knows who and what Section 31 is after this season. I also think there's a possibility, which I saw someone speculate this on Twitter, and I don't remember who, and I apologize right now because I would love to give you credit for it. It wasn't my actual idea. But one of the main ideas they've been throwing around for another show that they're thinking about is one focused around Starfleet Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a speculation on Twitter, which I have not been able to get out of my head since, that Pike would be a wonderful main character on that show, considering we know his background and that he goes into teaching at Starfleet Academy after he leaves the Enterprise.
I love that.
So I honestly, I think that's the most likely. As much as I would hate to ultimately see, we know what happens to him at the Academy, but it's also something when you're talking about building drama in a TV show, to have a character like that basically sacrifice their body for these other main characters of the show who are the cadets. It's a written plot line already for the show. So I think that's very, no matter which of any of these theories I threw out there that they choose, I think we're going to see Anson Mount as Captain Pike again.
I would love that. When Brother premiered and folks were like, I love Captain Pike, I want an Enterprise show immediately, I was like, nah, I'm not sure I want that. Like, how would it be different from Discovery other than a different set of characters? But the more we see of the Enterprise characters with Number One, and now we got a little more of Commander Nhan this week, I am 100% on board. And my total pie in the sky idea, and this is not my theory, we'll get to my theory, but my total pie in the sky idea, and I think I tweeted this a couple of days ago, is that CBS and Paramount remerge, and that the 14th Star Trek movie should be a Captain Pike with Anson Mount as Captain Pike, Rebecca Romijn as Number One, movie about the adventures of the Enterprise, because that would then be different than Discovery, because it would be a movie story rather than a TV story. But I love that idea for the Starfleet Academy show as well, and I think it would be the perfect way of bridging the character between the cage and the menagerie and kind of filling out the rest of that story for Pike, which Anson Mount has been fabulous at playing Pike, and I think that would go so well. I love that idea, and if someone from the production is listening, we 100% give you permission to steal that idea, and because it's so
yes, please. Definitely steal the idea. We want that show.
So my theory this week is actually not mine. It's one I read on the trekcore.com comment section for last week's episode. The person who provided this theory, their screen name was Fiery Little One. So thank you, Fiery Little One. You've put this idea in my head, and now I can't get rid of it, which is... so we saw this week that Saru went through the Vihari and did not die like he thought he would. And he gives this line at the end of the episode about how he doesn't feel fear anymore. Now he feels powerful. And what this person put forward is their idea is that the Ba'ul are actually the further evolution of the Kelpians, that effectively the Vihari is some form of Kelpian adolescence. And that once you go through the Vihari, it starts this process by which you then become what the Ba'ul are now. And that the Ba'ul, knowing the power that they have, are trying to stop other Kelpians from also reaching that stage for whatever reason. And I think that would be a really neat idea that kind of ties all of this together and makes the Ba'ul something a bit more than just... I mean, we don't know anything about them other than the fact that they harvest Kelpians as supposedly a food source. But I think it'd be super interesting if there's some deeper connection between these two races, that in fact, maybe they are the same race, and that there's some implications for Saru and his continued journey now about what that means for him. What do you think about that, Heather?
I think that's definitely a plausible theory. It is something that kind of crossed my mind at the end of that episode too, especially the way that that scene was formed, because it made it sound like the fact that he had power instead of fear was not necessarily a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I'm really interested to see where they go for that. I really think they're going to explore what happens more deeply on Kaminar, and that's possible. It's definitely possible.
Well, regardless of whether it comes true or not, Doug Jones has been absolutely fabulous as Saru, and I am 100% bought into his story and cannot wait to learn more about this character and to revisit Kaminar later in the season. Do you have a theory or wish for Discovery or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them at me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all we've got time for on this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Heather Kirby, for joining me today. Heather, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
Well, the easiest way to find me is on Twitter. My handle is at nerdygal33. My profile name is Never Apologize for Being Nerdy, because that's something no one should ever apologize for.
Hear, hear. And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy this show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you to my listeners. Thank you very much, Heather, for joining me today. And until next week, live long and prosper.